You know, when we think of war, we see destruction, tragedy, and loss. It just seems like the most illogical thing imaginable, right? A terrible event where everybody loses. But what if that's not the whole story? What if for some, conflict isn't a catastrophe to be avoided, but a business model to be perfected?
So that's what this explainer is all about. We're going to peel back the layers of geopolitics and economics to understand how the United States, a nation that was once super hesitant to get into global conflicts, ended up engineering the most powerful and profitable war machine in human history.
To really get this, we've got to go back in time. We'll start with America before World War II, then we'll trace how its war industry was born, see how that industry became this permanent part of the economy, and look at the powerful system that President Eisenhower actually warned us about. And finally, we'll see how it all leads to war becoming a modern business model.
Okay, so to get a sense of just how massive this transformation was, you have to picture an America that's completely different from the one we know today. Before World War II, the United States was largely isolationist. Its main interest wasn't being a global military power. It was all about trade.
And get this really tells you everything about America's priorities back then. The U.S. military was so underfunded and, well, overlooked that its army was actually smaller than Portugal's. Yeah, you heard that right. To the American public, war was a European problem. But that was all about to change in a big, big way.
So while America was looking inward, Imperial Japan was on the move, aggressively expanding all across Asia. In just a decade, it had built this huge empire. And when the US tried to slow them down by cutting off Japan's oil supply, Japan responded with a devastating surprise attack on the naval base at Pearl Harbor. In that single moment on December 7, 1941, America's age of isolation was shattered for good.
So, the attack on Pearl Harbor throws the US into a massive global war that it is completely, totally unprepared for. The country had this huge, urgent problem. It had almost no large-scale weapons industry. And here's the kicker. Private companies, they wanted nothing to do with it. They were terrified that if the war ended suddenly, their huge investments in factories and workers would just become worthless.
So, the US government came up with a genius solution to get rid of that fear: guaranteed profit contracts. The deal was simple and, honestly, impossible to refuse. The government basically told companies, look, build what we need, we will cover all of your costs, and on top of that, we will guarantee you a fixed profit. Just like that, all the risk vanished. War manufacturing went from being a huge gamble to a can't-lose jackpot.
And the effect? It was immediate. It was absolutely astonishing. The giants of American industry turned on a dime and pivoted to war. Ford, famous for cars, started churning out one B-24 bomber every single hour. General Motors started building tanks. Boeing mass-produced the iconic B-17 Flying Fortress. America's industrial might was unleashed, and it built an arsenal that would win the war.
So by 1945, the war is won. But in solving one problem, America had created a brand new one, and this one was way more complicated. The war machine it had built was so huge, so woven into the fabric of the economy, that it seemed impossible to just turn it off.
The scale of this was just immense. By the end of the war, a staggering 40% of the entire U.S. economy was dedicated to the defense sector. Just think about that for a second. The nation's economy was now fundamentally dependent on the business of war. How could it ever go back?
And this wasn't just some abstract number on a chart. This was about people. 17 million Americans, that's 13% of the entire population, had jobs that depended on these defense factories. For politicians, the math was brutal. Shutting down the war machine meant mass unemployment. Mass unemployment meant very angry voters. And angry voters meant losing elections. The industry had to keep going.
Now, this new reality wasn't lost on everybody. In 1961, there was one man who understood both the military and politics better than anyone: the outgoing president and former five-star general, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he decided to issue a very serious warning to the nation.
In his farewell address, he gave this powerful new force a name: the military-industrial complex. He warned of this permanent alliance between the armed forces, the government, and the massive arms industry it supported. An alliance, he said, whose influence could endanger the very liberties it was supposed to protect.
So how does this complex actually work? How does it keep itself going and get more and more powerful over time? Well, it operates through a system that is deeply connected and basically feeds itself.
It's really just a simple three-step feedback loop. First, defense corporations donate millions of dollars to the election campaigns of politicians. Second, those politicians, once they're in office, approve enormous military budgets. And third, the government then awards multi-billion-dollar weapons contracts right back to the very corporations that funded their campaigns. It's a perfect, profitable circle. And this whole cycle gets supercharged by what people call the revolving door. Just look at this statistic. Between 2008 and 2018, 380 high-ranking Pentagon officials left their government jobs to take very lucrative executive jobs at the same defense companies they used to regulate. This just completely blurs the line between national interest and corporate profit, making sure the system serves itself. Now, to see this system in action, all we have to do is look at the Vietnam War. This was a conflict that, for a lot of people, had no clear strategic purpose, and it cost over 58,000 American lives. But for the military-industrial complex, it was incredibly good for business. Between 1965 and 1975, the U.S. dropped an almost incomprehensible 4 million tons of bombs on North Vietnam. Let me put that in perspective for you. That's more than twice the amount dropped by all sides in the entirety of World War II. It averaged out to 45 tons of explosives every single hour for 10 straight years. And every single one of those bombs had to be built, sold, and shipped, fueling an industrial boom back home. Just look at the sales of Bell Helicopter, the company that made the iconic Huey helicopter. In just 5 years, right at the height of the war, their sales exploded from $10 million to over $2 billion. For millions of people, the war was a tragedy. For companies like Bell, it was a financial windfall. And this profitability, it isn't ancient history. During the 2 decades of the War on Terror, from 2001 to 2021, defense stocks didn't just do well, they absolutely crushed the general market. If you invested $10,000 in the S&P 500, it would have grown to a very respectable $61,000. But that same $10,000 invested in the top 5 defense contractors, it would have ballooned to $117,000. It performs so well because it's not subject to the same risks. With guaranteed government contracts and a political system designed to keep the money flowing, it's a nearly risk-free investment, fueled by global instability. So how do they make sure this continues? Lobbying. And the return on investment here is almost beyond belief. For every single dollar a weapons company spends trying to influence politicians, it can expect to get back thousands in government contracts. I mean, the numbers for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, they speak for themselves. This isn't just a good investment, it might be the best investment on planet Earth. Which brings us to the central, really unsettling question of this whole system. When a nation's most powerful corporations and its most influential politicians benefit so immensely from conflict, what is the real economic incentive for peace? Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. First, World War II created a permanent, state-sponsored war machine out of private industry. Second, this led to what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, that lasting bond between the government, the military, and defense corporations. Third, the massive size of this industry made it a political necessity tied to millions of jobs. And finally, this all created a system where conflict itself became one of the most profitable business models in the world.
It leaves us with one final, sobering thought. Perhaps the modern architecture of war isn't designed by generals on a battlefield, but by the complex and powerful economics that demand it, sustain it, and ultimately profit from it.